Hello, and welcome to the Dragon series. Today, doing the last of the chromatic dragons. It's the fearsome hunter of the frozen wastes, the white dragon. The white dragon is the dumbest of the chromatic dragons. That's not my opinion, it's a fact. They have an intelligence of 5. And the way that the monster manual in 5th edition describes the white dragon, and just coincidentally I happen to have this discarded 3rd edition monster manual, is about the same. They're described as the most bestial, the least intelligent of the chromatic dragons. And that, however, is almost balanced out by their ferocity. They're fierce hunters of the frozen wasteland. They enjoy collecting trophies, such as victims, but they like to eat frozen things. So when I started reading the flavor text, my initial thought was the white dragon's very limited, right, to specific areas. And when we think of white dragons, we think of them in the frosty Arctic kind of settings. And that, by virtue of their kind of geographic limit, means you're not likely to encounter a white dragon unless you have an adventure or a reason for your party to adventure into such a frozen area. The concept of the whole the lair of the white worm is almost like a destination adventure, right? Like you have to think of a reason why your party would want to go there. Like all dragons, they have hordes. And maybe there's something specific that this white dragon would have in its horde that would entice the adventurers to go and in search of it. But we'll start thinking of other ways to use white dragons beyond just the basic setting after we read a little bit more about them. So like all the dragons, they have the youngest to the oldest in terms of their explanation for the stats. The wormling itself has, the basic wormling abilities. Their breath weapon, of course, is cold. It recharges on a 5 or 6. It's a 15-foot cone and DC 12 con save, doing 5d8 cold damage. Now, you'll remember when I started the Dragon series that older editions had more age categories. So I got out this 3rd edition monster manual, and I just wanted to kind of read you the differences and compare. So the Wormling in 3rd edition had 3d12 plus 3 hit points compared to 5d8 plus 10. So 5d8 plus 10 would be 50 as a max. 3d12, 36 plus 3, 39. So they're a little weaker by their title, by Wormling. But then again, if you look up the White Dragon age chart in 3rd edition, by the time you get to what's considered a medium-sized dragon, the first age category for a medium-sized dragon is called Young. They have 9d12 plus 18 hit points with an 18 AC and 3d6 for their breath weapon damage. 3d6 versus 5d8. Yeah. So it's kind of funny, like when you think about all these different age categories that they had in 3rd edition for dragons. Wormling, very young, young, juvenile, young adult, adult, mature adult, old, very old, ancient, worm, and great worm. You had all these different categories, and they scaled up as you went through. And maybe from a design perspective, the reason for that was to give DMs more flexibility for how to integrate dragons into their campaigns. That's the only reason I could think to have that many different subtle variations in age and power level, is the game was doing the scaling for you, so that as a DM, if you're like, well, I have a party of 4 second level people, what can I do with a white dragon against them? Well, basically a wormling or a very young dragon. And they scaled it for you. Whereas my philosophy is kind of like, as a DM, that power is always in your hands with any creature. You can add hit points, take away hit points, make their AC stronger, make their attacks or damage stronger or weaker. There are a lot of ways to scale anything. And if you've checked out the other Monster Monday videos, you'll know that that's kind of part of my ingrained philosophy. I will say that in 3rd edition, they have special abilities that scale in here that we don't also see translated quite so to 5th. And some of those include things like fog cloud, gust of wind, freezing fog, wall of ice, and then at higher levels, control weather. So like these spell type abilities, in addition to the breath weapon in 3rd edition, might be something that you can kit bash. So if you decide like that you want to have whatever White Dragon age, right? In 5th edition, you know, your categories, the Wormling, the Young, the Adult, and the Ancient. You could add in some of those things that maybe don't exist. And I think that could add a little bit of non-damage causing fun to your game. So let's take a look at the White Dragon as described. The smallest, least intelligent, and most animalistic of the chromatic dragons, White Dragons dwell in frigid climes, favoring Arctic areas or icy mountains. They are vicious, cruel reptiles driven by hunger and greed. Primal and vengeful, it basically says that they consume only food that's been frozen. So they breath weapon it and then they eat it. Or they sometimes take it back and freeze it somewhere near their lair as a snack. White Dragon also keeps the bodies of its greatest enemies as trophies, freezing corpses where it can look upon them and gloat. The remains of giants, remorazes, and other dragons are often positioned prominently within a White Dragon's lair as warnings to intruders. Though only moderately intelligent, White Dragons have extraordinary memories. They recall every slight and defeat, and have been known to conduct malicious vendettas against creatures that have offended them. Lone Masters. While dragons avoid all other dragons except whites of the opposite sex, even then, when white dragons seek each other out as mates, they stay together only long enough to conceive offspring before fleeing into isolation again. So that's kind of important when you're thinking of the ecology component of your White Dragon in its setting. I think in some of these other dragon video ideas, I've shared concepts about family ties between different ages of dragons. And even, parental dragons coming to help out their offspring, or the offspring venturing out from the nest, so to speak, to stake their claim on the world. Whereas I think with a White Dragon, you should, by virtue, kind of lock your situation in where your White Dragon is a loner. Now, that's not to say that you could have, maybe you have your adventure with a young White Dragon who is in this Arctic area, who is wreaking havoc on a tribe of Arctic, barbarians, and the party comes to the aid and allies themselves with these Arctic barbarians. They defeat the young White Dragon, and nothing else happens after that. You could, have the adult White Dragon who birthed that young White Dragon come in to seek vengeance. Even though they don't live together, doesn't mean that you couldn't connect them, through bloodlines kind of thing. Powerful creatures can sometimes gain a White Dragon's obedience through a demonstration of physical or magical might. Frost giants challenge White Dragons, to prove their own strength and improve their status in their clans, and their cracked bones litter many a White Dragon's lair. However, a White Dragon defeated by a Frost Giant often becomes its servant, accepting the mastery of a superior creature in exchange for asserting its own domination over the other creatures that serve or oppose the giant. So that's yet another way that you can think about this from a DM perspective. How do I connect these plot points? How do I get my party, wherever your world is, Forgotten Realms, somewhere else, how do I get my party to the frozen wasteland? And why? Why would anybody go to a frozen wasteland? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's beautiful there in summertime. But whatever your hook is, it could be seeded with something else at first. So without even revealing the presence of your white dragon, you could have, a frost giant maybe did something or claimed something or took someone or something and returned to his frozen wasteland, and the party has to go rescue that person, place, or thing. And then they come across the dragon servant, the white dragon servant of this frost giant. That tends to scale on a little bit of the higher, maybe above level 10 kind of scale for adventuring, but I think the point is that you can hook the party with another plot point and then introduce the white dragon through that, or through that other NPC. Treasure under ice. White dragons love the cold sparkle of ice and favor treasure with similar qualities, particularly diamonds. But you could also have walrus and mammoth tusks, ivory, whalebone, sculptures, figureheads from ships, furs, and magic items seized from overly bold adventurers. Loose coins and gems are spread across a white dragon's lair, glittering like stars when the light strikes them. And then they talk about a white dragon's lair, lairs in icy caves and deep subterranean chambers far from the sun. They favor high mountain vales, accessible only by flying, caverns in cliff faces, and labyrinthine ice caves in glaciers. White dragons love vertical heights in their caverns, flying up to the ceiling to latch on like bats or slither down icy crevasses. A legendary white dragon's innate magic deepens the cold in the area around its lair. Mountain caverns are fast frozen by the white dragon's presence. A white dragon can often detect intruders by the way the keening wind in its lair changes tone. A white dragon rests on high ice shelves and cliffs in its lair, the floor around it a treacherous morass of broken ice and stone, hidden pits and slippery slopes. As foes struggle to move toward it, the dragon flies from perch to perch and destroys them with its freezing breath. So a lot of other scenarios I've thought through with these dragon situations. There are opportunities to connect the dragons to good or evil forces, or neutral, selfish, whatever you want to say, right? The idea of other people serving the dragons or being allies with the dragon, that kind of stuff. They're kind of specific about the white dragon flying solo. Pun very much intended. But they do reference that sometimes there will be maybe a tribe of dragon worshipping kobolds who serve a white dragon. And I see that relationship as being, the white dragon just tolerates these minions as long as they provide, food and stroke its ego or whatever. You know what I mean? It's kind of a loner, even if you do decide to implement some kind of cult or some kind of dragon worshipping kobold tribe, whatever, who serve it. And before I get into lair actions, I want to think through how do we break the white dragon out of the ice. And really, I literally mean from its setting, right? So one option for using these white dragons is to just figure out plot hooks that bring your party up into the frozen wasteland. And maybe it's a series of things that they need to kind of do that are already part of whatever you're running in your campaign, but you add in an element that draws them into this frozen wasteland. At any level, low, mid, high, you can scale the encounter with the white dragon appropriately. You could add in other things like kobolds. You could add in giants if they're high enough level. One thing that maybe we could think about is how do we bring the white dragon out of the Arctic setting? How do we break it free from the ice? And I thought about an interesting thing that sometimes impacts me when I'm coming up with narrative ideas for games. And that is when things in real world have an impact on my creative mind. And so here's the mind-blowing, not so mind-blowing idea that I had. I thought about the melting of the polar ice caps, in our real world, right? Our poles are melting and the water levels on our planet are rising because of it. And there are serious implications with this, right? Ecologically. and you see, pictures and videos on the internet of polar bear trapped on a ice drift that broke free because the polar ice caps are melting, And I thought, like, what if that was a thing in your D&D game? That's a way to break a white dragon out of the Arctic by melting the Arctic. What if some event happened in your D&D game, some cosmological event, right? Like meteor shower or a comet strikes the planet and, there's some significant thing that happens, right? That begins disrupting your frozen northern thing. And maybe the first evidence of it are lesser kind of cold-dwelling creatures making this exodus out of the north and into the lands below. So maybe your party at lower level encounters these weird, kobold tribes that are foreign, or even maybe some other cold creatures that are not super deadly, and finds, they fight them, whatever, and find that they have all these like weird furs that don't belong from this region. And maybe they find little weird like stone carved like dragon figurines, right? Like, so it's like you're planting the seed, you're foreshadowing the white dragon. And then maybe they hear whispers from like academic circles, like scholars and sages and wizards who have noted that, there's this great event that you give a cool and epic name to. Like the flares of the gods or something, I don't know. That basically is your meteor shower comet hitting the polar ice cap. And they're theorizing about what's, causing all these creatures to come south, and they're fleeing the frozen ice caps and stuff, right? And then maybe you have some minor elementals that are somehow factoring in with cold and water and air that are starting to come down. And gradually you continue this as, initially just like little encounters during your regular campaign, but more and more foreshadowing. And then maybe at a certain point you have like a well-known leading temple to the pantheon of the good gods, and they have seen, omens in their divination of a great doom from the north or something like that, where they've seen this prophecy that the gods hurled down these stones and struck the planet, and something is happening in the north that has not happened in thousands of years. And then there's weird weather events, and you tie these weird crazy electrical storms that move in with freezing cold rain and also electricity. And gradually, just layer by layer, you start introducing and populating these ideas that something's going on in the north. Now, if your party takes the bait, great. Then let them go north, dig up every monster that you can find that's in that northern area, and maybe by then they're high enough level, and you start introducing white dragons. Not in groups, not like a pack of wolves, but maybe you have a couple young ones first, and then they run into an adult. But gradually what they're going to discover is that there's an ancient white dragon in a lair to the north who's basically parked right next to the crater made by this comet that hit the frozen wasteland. And the comet's radioactive and it's melting, it's basically hot, right? And it's melting the ice, and it's sending all these creatures who once lived there to the south. And the one holdout is the grumpy old white dragon who's like, I'm not going anywhere. And so, but maybe there's also something immensely powerful about the core of this comet. Maybe it possesses some powerful elemental magic, right? So all of this stuff can be introduced through investigations, through continued, repeated, ongoing research into arcana, into religion, into nature, all of it. But ultimately, it's a way for you to think out of the box, like what would draw this white dragon away from that comet? Or maybe the white dragon didn't stay in its lair because the comet hit next to its lair and it fled, and it brought all these other lesser beings in terror fleeing from its path. So maybe the reason why you're bringing the white dragon out of the Arctic and into your natural lands is because its habitat was destroyed. So that's another variation on it. But I think it's important for DMs to think about why you would use a certain creature, where you would use it, and how you could do that differently. And I hope a couple of those ideas maybe stick, at least. And if you guys have any ideas about how you could use a white dragon, in its native setting or in other settings, of course, as always, share them in the comments below. Before I go, though, I want to read you a few of the crazy lair actions that they have. One is freezing fog fills a 20-foot radius sphere centered on a point the dragon can see. Jagged ice shards fall from the ceiling. Wow. Striking up to 3 creatures underneath that the dragon can see within 120 feet. The dragon makes 1 ranged attack roll +7 to hit against each target. On a hit, the target takes 3d6 piercing damage. The dragon creates an opaque wall of ice on a solid surface. Regional effects. Chilly fog lightly obscures the land within 6 miles of the dragon's lair. Freezing precipitation falls within 6 miles of the dragon's lair, sometimes forming blizzard conditions when the dragon is at rest. Icy walls block off areas in the dragon's lair. Each wall is 6 inches thick. That kind of mirrors some of these powers that they had in the 3rd edition Monster Manual, these special abilities, as they scaled up in power. But basically in 5th edition, they make these lair and regional effects. One more idea now by reading that just popped up in my head. Suppose you take this idea of a comet hitting the polar ice cap and melting everything, driving all the creatures to the south, right? So you take them out of their native environment gradually, with the white dragons and maybe your frost giants being the ones that come kind of last. But you could do really cool things to foreshadow that in your narrative component, right? So maybe the adventurers start to hear about a great blizzard that's slowly making its way south. You don't say anything about a dragon, right? But just imagine now, you're the DM, this dragon's left its place and it's heading south. It stops, it rests, maybe for a week, maybe for 2 weeks. As it's resting, its lair powers and regional powers begin to build. And then it goes on, it destroys a town. Maybe it takes a couple arrows, blah, 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 but it basically ices over, destroys this town, finds like a patch of hills, nests there, right? Now it's out of the Arctic, it's just in the north of your land. And there's weird blizzards and weird freezing rain and fog. And so every time it stops to rest, it kind of creates this lair regional effect. Now, maybe that's not rules as written, but I think it'd be cool. Like a mysterious, weather pattern is happening. Those of you who are meteorologists are probably like, well, actually, Bill, you can't. I think it would be cool from a narrative perspective to kind of have news come to your party about these strange things happening in the north without truly revealing outright that this is a white dragon. Maybe you have multiple, right? Maybe several branches, several offspring, like 4 or 5, whatever, you could scale it up, who are now adults of an ancient white dragon, are all fleeing the north because their polar ice caps are melting, and in various points, just kind of cascading down from the north into your campaign world, are all these weird weather effects and freezing rain and fog and blizzards and stuff. And people are like, what is going on? And you kind of build that myth. And your party maybe doesn't know until they encounter the first one. And then maybe they defeat the first one and they're like, yeah, we defeated the first one. And then they start getting reports in from other kingdoms, to the east and west along that same parallel that, they're having similar things. And they start putting the pieces together with the comet hitting the north and all these other elements. So, I don't know. That's just my thought. And if you wanted to just play this easy, come up with a really cool and powerful magical item that the party wants to get and put it up in the north, in the Arctic, in the lair of a white dragon. And that's a whole adventure by itself. So, hopefully this has been informative or entertaining. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down and leave a comment. Let me know about your experiences as a DM if you've used white dragons, or as a player if you've encountered them. Thanks as always to my patrons for their eternal support. You have my gratitude. And to all the rest of you subscribers, have a great game. Fearsome hunter of the frozen wastes, white dragon gonna eat your face. God, the 3rd edition picture of them is so lame. Not that I could do any better. All right, ready?